37 family members. That's how many people this king murdered with his own orders. Not enemies, not rivals, but his own blood, his wives, his sons, his brothers, even his own mother. And here's the insane part. He didn't do it in a fit of rage or madness. Every single murder was calculated, planned, methodical. He would invite them to dinner, laugh with them, embrace them, and then have them executed that same night. The most terrifying part? He ruled for 33 years after his killing spree began. 33 years of absolute power built on the corpses of his own family. You're probably thinking this sounds like something from Game of Thrones, but wait until you hear what actually happened, because the truth is so disturbing, so systematically evil, that historians still debate whether he was a genius or a monster. This is King Murad IV of the Ottoman Empire, and boy, did he take family dysfunction to a whole new level. Picture this. A one-year-old boy watches his father get strangled by palace guards. He sees his uncle seize the throne. He watches his brothers disappear one by one. And then he thinks to himself, if this is what power requires, then I'll be better at it than anyone who came before me. But how does a traumatized child become history's most ruthless family killer? How does someone murder their own mother and sleep peacefully that same night? Little did anyone know that young Murad was taking notes, studying every betrayal, memorizing every weakness. And when his time came, he would use those lessons to orchestrate the most horrifying family purge in royal history. Welcome to the insane true story of the king who turned paranoia into an art form. You see, Murad didn't start as a monster. He was made into one. Born in 1,612 inches the Topkapi Palace in Constantinople, he entered a world where family meant danger. The Ottoman Empire had a peculiar tradition called fratricide. When a new sultan took power, he would execute all his brothers to prevent civil war. It was an early lesson for Murad that blood relations meant nothing when it came to power. His father, Sultan Ahmed I, died when Murad was just 5 years old, and that's when the real education began. The young prince watched as his mentally unstable uncle Mustafa was placed on the throne, only to be deposed months later. Then came his older brother Osman II, who took power at age 14. Murad must have thought his brother would protect him, guide him, show him how to rule. Instead, he watched Osman make every possible mistake, alienating the Janissaries, the elite military corps, trying to reform too quickly, trusting the wrong people. The truth is, Murad was incredibly intelligent, even as a child. Palace servants would later reflect on how he would sit silently during court sessions, never speaking, just watching. Always watching. He noticed how his brother Osman ignored the warning signs, how he dismissed his mother's advice, how he underestimated his enemies. And then, in 1622, when Murad was just 11 years old, he witnessed something that would haunt him forever. The Janissaries revolted. They dragged Sultan Osman II from the palace, and in the most brutal fashion imaginable, they strangled him to death in the notorious Yedikule fortress. But here's the crucial part. They didn't just kill him. They tortured him first. They crushed his testicles. They made him suffer. And young Murad learned another lesson. Showing weakness doesn't inspire mercy. It invites cruelty. This traumatic event fundamentally rewired Murad's psychology. Where other children might have been broken by such horror, Murad became fascinated. He would later tell his advisors that watching his brother die taught him the most important lesson of his life. In the Game of Thrones, you either kill or be killed. There is no middle ground. In 1623, at just 11 years old, Murad IV was placed on the Ottoman throne. But here's what's really interesting. He wasn't actually in charge. His mother, Kosem Sultan, ruled as regent, and she was arguably one of the most powerful women in Ottoman history. For the first few years, Murad was essentially a puppet, watching his mother navigate the treacherous waters of Ottoman politics. But Murad saw an opportunity here. While everyone dismissed him as a child, he studied. He learned 6 languages. He memorized the Quran. He trained with weapons in secret. Using these new connections with military instructors and religious scholars, he built a network of loyalists who saw potential in the young sultan. The empire was falling apart around him. The Safavids had taken Baghdad. The Janissaries were running wild in the streets. Provincial governors were basically independent rulers. Everyone expected the boy sultan to fail, but Murad was playing a longer game. You see, Murad realized something crucial. His youth was actually an advantage. Enemies underestimated him. Allies felt protective of him. He could make mistakes, and people would blame his advisors, not him. In many ways, it was such an incredibly simple move, but it was the meticulous planning that made it possible. By age 18, Murad had identified every threat in the palace. He knew which janissaries were loyal, which viziers were corrupt, which family members were plotting against him. But he didn't act. Not yet. He waited, because Murad understood that timing was everything. Then, in 1632, something happened that changed everything. A massive fire destroyed much of Constantinople. The Janissaries, instead of helping, looted the city. The people were furious. They wanted strong leadership. And that's when Murad made his move. He appeared in public for the first time as an adult, not the boy sultan everyone remembered, but a powerful, imposing figure. At 20 years old, he stood 6 feet tall, with broad shoulders and eyes that contemporary accounts describe as terrifying in their intensity. He announced that the old ways were over, the corruption would end, the empire would be restored, and anyone who stood in his way would be destroyed. But here's the crucial part that historians often miss. Murad didn't start by killing his family. He started by killing everyone else's families first. In 1633, he executed the Grand Vizier Hafiz Ahmed Pasha. Then he killed the vizier's sons, then his brothers, then his cousins. It was a message. Loyalty to anyone except the Sultan was a death sentence. What the court didn't realize was that Murad was using these executions as practice, refining his methods, testing reactions, seeing how far he could push before people pushed back. The answer? There was no limit. The more brutal he became, the more people feared him. And fear, Murad discovered, was more powerful than love could ever be. Then came the moment that would define his reign. His brother Bayezid had been caught corresponding with Persian ambassadors. Now, this might have been innocent. Bayezid was a scholar, interested in Persian poetry, but Murad saw opportunity. He invited Bayezid to dinner on the 27th of February, 1635. They ate together, laughed about childhood memories, and Murad even promised to fund Bayezid's new library. That night, while Bayezid slept, palace executioners entered his room with a silk cord. The execution method was deliberate. Strangulation was reserved for royal blood, considered more honorable than the sword. But there was nothing honorable about what followed. Murad now had absolute power, and this is very different from normal power. Normal power requires compromise, negotiation, alliance building. Absolute power requires only fear. And Murad had discovered the perfect formula. Kill unpredictably. Kill family members to show no one is safe, but always kill with legal justification. Every execution had a reason: treason, corruption, incompetence. He wasn't a madman, he would insist. He was a perfectionist. The Ottoman Empire under Murad became a kingdom of terror. He banned coffee, tobacco, and alcohol, making them capital offenses. He would walk the streets of Constantinople at night in disguise, personally executing anyone he caught breaking his laws. One night, he found a group of men drinking in a tavern. He didn't arrest them. He had them walled inside the building and burned alive. The message was clear. The Sultan was everywhere, and mercy was extinct. By 1638, Murad had executed over 20,000 people, including 37 members of his own family. His own mother, Kosum Sultan, lived in constant fear of her son. She would later say that she couldn't sleep, knowing that any night might be her last. But the empire was prospering. Baghdad was reconquered. The Safavids were defeated. The treasury was full. For many Ottomans, the blood price was worth it. The problem was, Murad had become addicted to killing. It started as strategy, but became compulsion. He would execute servants for serving cold soup. He killed a musician for playing a wrong note. He executed his own son, Prince Ahmed, on suspicion that the boy might one day challenge him. But the paranoia didn't stop there. Little did Murad know, but his obsession with eliminating threats was actually creating them. The Janissaries, who had initially supported his iron rule, began to whisper, if the Sultan could kill his own blood so easily, what protection did they have? The religious authorities started questioning whether such brutality was truly Allah's will. Even his most loyal viziers began sleeping with guards outside their doors. However, back in the palace, people were starting to ask questions. Where was the line? When would the killing stop? The answer, terrifyingly, was never. Murad had created a system that required constant bloodshed to maintain. Like a shark that must keep moving to breathe, Murad's regime needed fresh executions to remind everyone why they should fear him. But here's what Murad didn't realize. He had killed so many family members that the line of succession was nearly extinct. He had two brothers left, Ibrahim, who was mentally unstable, and Mehmed, who was only 8 years old. The dynasty that had ruled for centuries was down to 3 men, and one of them was slowly drinking himself to death. Because that's the other thing about Murad. Despite banning alcohol for everyone else, he had become a massive alcoholic. He would drink entire barrels of wine in single sittings. His liver was failing. His body was breaking down. The man who had executed others for taking a sip of wine was literally killing himself with the stuff. The irony wasn't lost on his subjects, but no one dared point it out. Then in February 1640, something happened that even Murad couldn't control. His own body betrayed him. Years of alcoholism had developed into cirrhosis of the liver. He was just 27 years old, but his physicians told him he had weeks, maybe days to live. For Murad, as the reality of his mortality started to come out, the paranoia reached new heights. He ordered the execution of his brother Ibrahim, the last adult male in the Ottoman dynasty besides himself. But here's where fate intervened. His mother, Kosem Sultan, had lived in fear of her son for years, but now she saw her chance. She convinced the executioners to delay, telling them that killing Ibrahim would mean the end of the Ottoman dynasty. She promised them wealth, positions, safety, anything to buy time. As Murad lay dying, he kept asking whether Ibrahim was dead yet. His attendants lied, saying the execution had been carried out. But Ibrahim was hidden in the palace, protected by the very people who had carried out so many of Murad's death sentences. On the 8th of February 1640, Murad IV died, reportedly saying, "I have no friend in this world," as his last words. The man who had killed 37 family members died alone, paranoid, and despised. The palace erupted in celebration. Servants, who had lived in terror for years, wept with relief. The Janissaries fired cannons not in mourning, but in joy. As for Ibrahim, he emerged from hiding to become Sultan Ibrahim I. He was so traumatized by his near-death experience that when they told him Murad was dead and he was now Sultan, he refused to believe it. He thought it was another of his brother's tests. Only when he saw Murad's corpse with his own eyes did he accept that his nightmare was over. The empire Murad had built on fear collapsed almost immediately. Ibrahim's reign was a disaster. He was known as Ibrahim the Mad, and within 8 years, he too would be executed. The Ottoman Empire never fully recovered from Murad's reign of terror. Ultimately, though, the people who suffered most were the Ottoman people themselves. Murad had created a culture of fear so pervasive that innovation stopped, creativity died, and the empire began its long, slow decline. What is clear is this was an example of how absolute power doesn't just corrupt, it destroys everything it touches. Reports suggest that towards the end, Murad had gone from a traumatized child trying to survive to something far worse. A man who had forgotten how to be human. Modern psychologists who have studied Murad's life suggest he likely suffered from severe PTSD combined with antisocial personality disorder. The trauma of watching his father and brother die, combined with the constant threat of assassination, created a perfect storm of paranoia and violence. But here's what's really interesting, though. Murad was incredibly effective as a military leader. He personally led armies, reconquered lost territories, and restored the empire's finances. In any other context, he might have been remembered as one of the great sultans. Instead, he's remembered as a cautionary tale about the price of power. The Ottoman Empire learned a crucial lesson from Murad's reign. A system built on fratricide and fear inevitably produces monsters. Within a generation, the practice of royal fratricide was officially abolished. Future sultans would imprison their brothers instead of killing them. It was still cruel, but it was progress. What Murad never understood was that true power comes not from fear, but from respect. Not from isolation, but from connection. He died friendless and alone, surrounded by the ghosts of the family he had murdered. In trying to hold his throne, he had lost his humanity. And in the end, that throne consumed him just as surely as he had consumed others. Now, whilst the story of Murad IV is pretty horrifying, I still wouldn't call him the most paranoid ruler in history. For that, you're going to want to check out the absolutely insane story of Stalin, a man who was so paranoid that he had his own doctors arrested for trying to save his life. The level of suspicion and the body count make Murad look almost rational by comparison. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed, and I'll see you in the next video. Cheers.